Will commercial communication satellites move to the 600 series? When will this happen? No, they won't move to the 600 series. I'll just take a step back. So earlier this year, the Departments of State and Defense published what's referred to as the 1248 report. That was a section of the NDA from a couple of years ago, which basically set out the case why national security warranted the change in jurisdictional status of commercial satellites and related items and other items from the ITAR Category 15 to the Commerce Control List. And I just refer you back to that report for the substance, but essentially what it said is that the current system of treating as munitions list items commercial satellites and related items that were much more widely available and that had to be subject to the limitations of the ITAR, particularly the see-through rule, the absence of a de minimis rule, was creating really dramatic incentives for foreign satellite makers to literally avoid buying U.S. origin items and to create industries outside the United States to manufacture parts and components for satellites, which then wouldn't have all the collateral limitations. Right now, a French-made satellite with one U.S. origin part, that's 15E, requires State Department authorization to transfer from France to Germany, even though it's 99% foreign origin. And so we have this delicate balance, as described in the report, between not wanting to allow satellite-related technology or parts components for countries of concern, and there was a significant section in the report regarding China, but we didn't want those concerns to further harm the industrial base. And the Defense Department, I think, just did a terrific job at describing this in their report. And so what we did, this is a long way to answer your question, in order to give life and flesh out what this would look like if Congress were to pass legislation that would give back to the President the authority of structuring satellite controls as the administration determined were warranted for national security and foreign policy reasons. Right now there's no flexibility. Commercial satellites and related items must be ITAR controlled regardless of foreign availability or significance or anything else. Assuming that Congress gives back that authority, we wanted to show the world what we had in mind for where things would go. And so in Appendix 1 and 2 of the report, we published following the same structure of the positive list review effort, revised Category 15, where principally commercial satellites as such are no longer listed there. 15A basically describes not so much commercial or remote sensing or scientific or research, but rather spacecraft generally that have particular characteristics or abilities, regardless of whether you call them commercial or scientific or research or remote sensing. So we got away from using these broad catch-all phrases and describe the types of end item characteristics that would be in 15E. But more importantly, I think, for particularly the second and third tier suppliers in the United States for these parts and components, that, as the Defense Department described, are very dependent upon the Defense Department acquisition process, which is decreasing in terms of total acquisitions. They needed the availability or the ability to expand that market to sales to allied countries. And so what we did was, what the Defense Department did, is it listed in 15E a specific list, I think 19, of types of parts and components that are very important to the Defense Department that even for export to close allies, we still want to see on a case-by-case basis. And then kept the catch-all phrase using the space-qualified definition in a new ECCN that was in that appendix called 9A515, and it would follow the same structure where .x, 9A515.x, would be the catch-all for just about anything that's in 15E but not otherwise listed elsewhere positively. And you notice that it's in I said 9A515. We didn't want to put it into the 600 series because by definition these are not military items. These are not on the munitions list. These are largely items, frankly, that are unilateral, largely if not exclusively in terms of these parts and components, that are unilaterally controlled by the United States. That is, no other country controls them. And so we didn't want to complicate our organizational structure by pulling the satellite controls into the 600 series, which is meant to reflect and track the Wassenaar munitions list structure. So we proposed the same structure, 9A515, so 9A515.A, would be spacecraft, whether commercial or scientific or whatever, that operate in space, that are not listed on the U.S. munitions list, and so 9A515.A would control. Then we had a couple of specific items in .B and .C and .D. The .X would be the catch-all. Production equipment, specially designed to make those items would be in the 9B515. Software for those items would be 9D515, and technology for the production, development, operation, et cetera, would be in 9E515. And the principal difference is that then the dual-use STA that became final last year would apply. So that would allow for not only license exception for exports to those 36 countries, but it would also then return back the status of what existed prior to the 1999 NDA of the de minimis rule for most of the world. However, in that rule, it proposed, or in that report, it proposed the same structure that would follow for the 600 series with respect to the application of the de minimis rule for countries such as China subject to an arms embargo, which is that it would be 0%. So if you're building items destined overseas, if you're overseas building items destined for a country subject to an arms embargo, then the same de minimis rule would apply, is that there isn't one. The same ITAR rules would apply in that the export of that foreign-made item to that country subject to an arms embargo would require authorization, presumptively denied. And but with respect to the rest of the world, then the 25% de minimis rule would kick in. But all of that is moot until and unless there's legislation that gives that authority back to the Congress to do this, and nothing becomes final until A, that happens, B, whatever limitations or conditions are applied in the legislation are satisfied. And as Eric described in his speech yesterday, the current draft of the Smith Amendment, or the current Smith Amendment to the NDA that came out of the House, has some rather significant limitations that would cripple large parts of controls, the ability to control and change the control of satellites, in fact, all other items. And I don't know, I can't predict what will happen with this process with the Congress generally. I'll leave that up to you to give me advice and thoughts on. But then once that, assuming that does happen, either this year or next, then the next step would happen is that we would likely, or whoever is in charge, would take those attachments that we put together to the 1248 report, drop them into a Federal Register notice in a proposed rule, send it out for public comment, and then go through the process that I described yesterday with respect to getting proposed rules out. So on the when will this happen, it's a long answer of saying it depends. So anyway, wow, we've got lots of cards. I maybe should speak more briefly. Here, why don't you do a couple and I'll